Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Hello, everyone. We're trying this. We have here a show at Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art, which I was asked to curate, and we're calling it The Found Voice in Art. And when I was first asked to work with the permanent collection here and put something together for this terrific space, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And as I worked on it with Beverly Harnett, the thing that impressed me is that the Southern Alleghenies collection, it includes just about everything you could imagine from the history of art, from realism to surrealism and expressionism and so on. And it also includes, I think quite uniquely for a mid-sized museum like this, not only sort of very famous artists like Thomas Art Benton, for instance, but also lesser known artists who nonetheless were doing terrific work and whose work deserves to be seen. So we tried in this exhibit to include a full range of different aesthetics, a different, as far as the name brand faction, you might say. And I think it makes for a very interesting collection of work. So this exhibit, it's not about a style or subject matter or a particular artist, but it's about the artist's voice. How does an artist find their voice? What does that even mean? You know, people talk all the time, and if I could show you this, Dante, if you can, are you seeing the Beziotes here? Here's a painting by William Beziotes, an artist who was born in Pittsburgh, like myself. And he was painting this. This was painted in 1946. Beziotes actually had his very first one-man show in 1944 at the Guggenheim Gallery in New York City. That's quite a place to start your career. But he became very well known in the abstract expressionist field, even though he didn't feel that he was an abstract expressionist. He thought of himself more as almost a surrealist and was influenced by artists like Miro, much more so than the action painters were. So Beziotes is one example, there are no really bright colors in the Beziotes. So you might say, well, how does this fit with an artist's voice? His voice is not loud, sharp, and strong. It's kind of very understated, serious, and kind of mysterious. And I think the color choices and also the fact that there's a lot of horizontal and vertical lines in this helps calm down the painting. We'll see other paintings in this exhibit that are full of sharp diagonals. You don't really find that in Beziotes' work, and that's part of what gives it the voice that it has. I'd like to show you this painting by Joe Sweeney, who's a good pal of mine, who teaches at the Academy, as I do, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia. And Joe and I have been out painting together, and I love this piece. We talk about the artist's voice here. Joe was involved in some shows here in 2018, and he managed to do this painting as a result of visiting this area. And I think it's anyone who's been here to Salmon knows that we're up high in the mountains, and Joe managed to get this really terrific painting of some hang gliders enjoying the mountain as a form of recreation. Okay, if we could go up here. You know, we're going to, I would say that my thesis, more or less, or the overriding idea behind this show of the artist's voice is that the structure of a painting which interacts with each person's own sensibilities, that is what determines what that voice is. Two people might look at this painting or any of these and get very different reactions, and that's because of their own sensibilities. What the artist intended may or may not be what people experience as they look at the work, but there's always this sense of the artist's mind saying, okay, what do I want to paint? How do I want to paint it? And in Susan Severson's work, I really appreciate Susan's work because not only is she a very fine painter, I mean, when you look at this, it is technically extremely well done. She also was a local force, essentially, in the art community of this region. And we think about this region, the Southern Alleghenies, we're talking about an area that was once loaded with coal mines and steel mills and that kind of thing, and is now transitioning to other kinds of activities. Susan and her husband came here from New York. They loved the Altoona area. They settled here. And Susan, who got her MFA from Brooklyn College, became one of the leaders of the local art scene. She worked extensively with a group called Art in Common, encouraging other people to do art, giving artists from this whole region an outlet for their creative activities. So she's a revered person in the local community, and I think a very fine painter. I'm really glad she's in this show. So. This first batch that we come up here, these are all realist pieces, and Audrey Chiradio, beautiful piece of a lantern in sand, and we compare that to Matthew Smith's Vermilion Cliffs. These are paintings about the beauty of nature. Now, some artists, that's the main thing that they want to talk about. That's what their voice is about. Nature inspires them, so they do paintings that try to inspire others and express that sort of sense of awe in nature. We do have a great opening going on here down on the first floor. And we're going to be down there a little bit later after we tour through here, but that's where you're hearing all the activity. I love seeing people in the museum. It's great. This piece by Marshall Joyce, just a perfect, beautifully composed maritime kind of harbor scene. This is super high quality, plein air kind of work. And, again, handling of atmospheric perspective, beautiful composition, wonderful piece that you can see here at Southern Alleghenies. Along those lines here, a couple others, but I thought this Wyoming Winter by Scott Christensen, it is extremely difficult to do a painting this good. This is a fantastic piece. The color, the composition, the sense of air, atmosphere, temperature, beautifully realized. Another example of the really high quality work that you can find here at the museum. Let's see, I'm going to skip over that. Let's switch. We've got a whole grouping of artists whose main concern is nature, realism, expressing the joy of nature, very inspiring kinds of pieces. And this piece by Willie Lee Atkins, he lived mostly in Washington, D.C. And I have, now we're talking about a realist artist or an abstractionist. Let me find. And here it is, yeah. And I think, in preparing for this talk, I picked these pieces because I liked the way they looked. I didn't know anything about a lot of these artists, including Willie Lee Atkins. And when I looked into him, I found out that during World War II, he was in the Army and he served as a map specialist. And then eventually he ended up settling in the area around here of Altoona. And he's a very accomplished abstract painter. But I love the fact that there's a life story behind every one of these paintings. John Haltberg's wrecked car. This guy, you know, now he lives out on the West Coast, I believe, and he does kind of really beautiful semi-abstract. You have this feeling that you're inside a wrecked car or outside it looking in, but it's really about an abstraction. I think the sense of rustiness, darkness with light beyond, those are part of the voice of this painting. What happened there? Are we inside a wrecked car? What does this painting say to you? What might be something very different than what it says to me? And there's just enough realism here to place you with the door, the hinge, and then the sense of some kind of, you know, broken glass. He uses his paint is very liquid and fluid, lots of drips. This was painted in 1960. And at that time, I think Richard Diebenkorn out on the West Coast was influencing a lot of artists. I don't know if Diebenkorn influenced John Haltberg or not, but certainly the idea of fluid, liquid, active paint, accidents of paint, using those, exploiting those, as Jackson Pollock with his drip paintings and so on. So all that was going on in the art world at that time. And John Haltberg made use of many of those techniques in this piece. Let's move ahead. I especially, this piece by Tom Dongilla. Dongilla, I spent a year at Indiana, PA. It was a state teachers college at the time. And Dongilla was one of my teachers at Indiana. And I always liked Mr. Dongilla as one of my teachers. He taught me color and composition. And I was glad to see his work in the collection here. And really terrific piece, I think. I believe I even saw this in New York City when a group of Indiana instructors had a show there. I think it may have been at a place called the NoHo Gallery. And we went up to see that show, and my great teacher, John Dropshaw, was in it, and Tom Dongilla was as well. But Tom's work, very, very solid, beautifully put together, lots of texture. You know, wonderful artist. Really understood abstraction. When we look at, now here's a very small, but very important painting. This is by Thomas Moran. And you know, you look at, this is one of the oldest paintings in the exhibit. It was done in 1900, 122 years ago. And in 1872, Thomas Moran went to Yellowstone Park with a US Geological Survey team and did a series of paintings of the Rocky Mountains and Yellowstone area. Those paintings were used to inspire the Congress to establish Yellowstone Park. So if you're looking for, why do we have Yellowstone Park? Part of the reason is because of Thomas Moran and Albert Bierstadt, the artists who were on that trip, who did these great inspiring paintings. Because these people in Washington and so on, they said, why should we put all this money into this park? When they saw those paintings, they said, yeah, we have to do this. Let's do this. So Thomas Moran, very important artist. Not one of his great masterpieces, but a very fine small painting here at Sama. I have next a series of paintings that involve long horizontals and very almost a color field kind of aspect. You get the sense, this is called Falling Star by Gordon Russell. And you don't quite know what it is. You look, falling star, well, it could be any of a number of things. So it's got kind of a mysterious, but a very rich surface, beautifully done. I love the spacing here between these two areas, these two negative areas, and this horizontal here. It's not in the center. We talk about the rule of thirds in design. This is right on the third, I believe, of this rectangle, and quite a beautiful piece. And compare that. Now, this guy, Gene Davis, if you want to know who played poker with Harry Truman, it was this guy. he was an artist who worked in Washington, D.C., and he became known for these color field striped paintings, exploring that as that's all you need in painting is color and shapes and forms. And I love the fact that this artist would then go to the White House and have a poker game with Harry Truman. And I picture them smoking cigars and playing poker after Gene Davis had worked on a painting like this all day. But I think as you look at this is a beautifully executed painting. The color is bright, spring-like, very, very pleasant painting. There's no subject matter in it except for the paint itself. And if we compare that to a painting that is structured very similarly by Anthony Miraglia, and we find the same vertical bands in this, but this is a very realistic painting. The palettes are very similar. You've got where the Davis is very hard and sharp edge. The one big difference is the softness and the quietness of the Miraglia. Now, you might say, okay, artist voice, why do a painting of a chair sitting in a distant room with all this emptiness up here? That's where your own sensibilities come into play. Does this, what is someone going to come and sit down in the chair? Has someone been in the chair and left? How do you react to this? And I don't know enough about this artist to really understand what is going on, but I know how I react. And I see it as a very, almost a kind of Edward Hopper-like painting about isolation. So it's almost like the chair is in the corner, and out in here in my space where I'm looking at it, this is where all the people are, but that is a different world in there. I think between the Miraglia, Robert Goff, this very spare, a painting with a lot of emptiness in it, like the Miraglia, and we'll see the Kipnis next. Artists, now this is very meticulously done. Every little branch on those trees, and the handling of the grass and the fence posts. This painting was done in 1976. We think in terms what was going on in the art world in general, pop art, things like that, pop art. And here Robert is doing this very meticulous, very spare, very inward looking landscape paintings. I would again point out, when we talk about craft, where this division of space is, again, it's probably about a third up. We find a beautiful balance between this structure here and the extra fence posts here. Like if you take that fence post out, this painting no longer sits correctly. That fence post is related to that. So we see all these decisions that the artist makes, one of which is, what am I going to paint? And it's basically an empty hill with a shack of some kind of shed silhouetted against the sky. It's not a beautiful spot in nature. It's not a canyon, a stream. It probably expresses something about isolation more than anything else. Artist's voice. And one other thing about this, that long horizontal, it's like the horizontal line of the ocean, that it calms you down, makes you introspective and makes you think. So I think it's very fitting the way he put this painting together. Robert Kipnis, a really interesting artist, an artist that I've known his work for quite a long time. And he also is one who prefers the idea of emptiness in his work. Let me get to. Yeah, in the 1950s, Robert Kipnis, he painted all day and he worked all night in the post office. You know, how does an artist survive? In the 1950s, he was practically unknown. He was born in 1931, was raised in England, eventually became a Royal Academician. His father was a layout artist for Sears, and his mother did fashion illustration. He ended up doing these very spare, quiet, introspective paintings of buildings, yards, vegetation, things like that. He described himself as having a lifelong embrace of solitude. He also was an illustrator of certain poets. Rainer Maria Rilke was one, and Emily Dickinson. And I think when you think of those poets, if you know them at all, you can see why this fits so well with Rilke and Dickinson's poetry. And a wonderful, the craftsmanship is absolutely incredible when you look at these. The surface, the beautiful surface, that gradation to softness there. See, if that's a hard edge, you don't get that sense of depth and sense of quietness of the fog enveloping these buildings. So that's a very difficult effect to get, but he was really an expert at that. We're going to move to one of my favorite parts, and that is put together these pieces of, we might say, industrial art. And we have artists such as Garrett Benneker. Let me find that. Garrett Benneker. And Benneker, you know, he was the one that did, let me just find this because I think this is important. During World War I, he did a poster called "We'll Get the Job Done." And it was to raise money for the war effort, World War I we're talking about. And it sold over 3 million copies. Now that's pretty incredible. He went around the country on these bond and fundraising efforts to help support the war effort and support the troops, and sold 3 million copies of his poster, "We'll Get the Job Done." Some people describe his work as sooty romanticism, but he was from this area. He knew steel towns. He knew what it was like to work in a mill. And you know, and I think this frame is absolutely incredible. Yeah. Now, I tried to find kind of interesting tidbits about some of these artists, and you're amazed at what you find. What we're looking at here, the artist's name is Henry Kerner. Now, Henry Kerner was born in Austria. It was a Jewish family. And when Hitler annexed Austria, his family fled and they went to Italy and eventually worked their way to New York City. In 1944, he was drafted into the US Army and he did posters, including another famous poster called Someone Talked. But in 1945, this guy was the official sketch artist at the Nuremberg trials in Germany. Isn't that amazing? Dante, who's holding the camera, just went, whoa. I mean, imagine this guy sitting there all during the Nuremberg trials, doing drawings of, you know, Goering and Goebbels and all the American prosecutors and so on. And this guy, his painting now, we're looking at it here in the Southern Alleghenies. I was talking to Jennifer Baker, who's here with us, and we were talking about, you know, why all these skulls? Imagine being in the army in 1945, the concentration camps, you're Jewish. He actually went back to Austria looking for the remnants of his family. They had all been killed during the war. So when, in fact, Dante, you and I were thinking about this painting. These skulls, when you think of his experience in World War II, these skulls make much more sense, don't they? He was also, you know, he used a kind of a strange spatial arrangements of, you know, small figures in the front, large figures in the back, counter to perspective, but it's very much from the work of Giotto and even artists from the Middle Ages like Cimabue. And I think he liked that, the way that flattened out the painting. But I think, you know, what a story. He lived in Pittsburgh from 52 to 53, met his wife there at Chatham College. And another thing I think of interest about this, he painted 46 portraits for Time magazine. So if you were looking at Time magazine from 1955 to 67, you saw Henry Kerner's work on the cover of Time magazine. And everyone that posed for him had to pose in person. He didn't use any photographs. Now, one of my art heroes is Charles Burchfield, and I love this very, very much Southern Alleghenies. It's called the Hump Operations in Altoona. You know, one of these rail yards around here. Charles Burchfield, very inspirational artist to me. I remember as a child seeing my own father come back from the steel mills with a lunch bucket and, you know, grimy from working all day in the mill and setting that lunch bucket down and, you know, wanting to just relax for a while. And Burchfield is the guy who, even as a teenager, his work, he painted workers like that. Men trudging back from jobs in coal mines and so on. And so I've always loved Charles Burchfield, and I think this is a really good example of his watercolor work. Another artist, similar story. A lot of these art, you know, what was going on during World War II? Now, this was painted in 1986, but the artist Florian Lawton when World War II broke out in 1944, he had 4 brothers. They all joined the army at the same time. And Florian Lawton worked, one of the things that he did was do paintings on bombers of, you know, pinup girls and things like that. So when you see these movies of, you know, B-52s and so on, they have a painting on the front. Florian Lawton was one of the guys who might have done those paintings. He mainly created topographical maps. Great admirer of Winslow Homer and Thomas Eakins. And so another really great artist. I forgot to mention Garrett Benneker down there, the steel mill. He also did the ivory soap advertisements all during the 30s and 40s. Another little tidbit that you get. This, if you can see both these at the same time, we hung these, Jack Lembeck and Robert Douglas Hunter. And I think these 2 paintings are actually very similar in their voice, in spite of the fact that this is total abstraction and this is a very highly rendered realism. And the reason I say that is because of the influence or the interest in 3-dimensional illusion. Lembeck's paintings here, the abstract shapes seem to float and there's a space between the green and the wall here. You know, we create that illusion. In Robert Douglas Hunter's, he uses that Baroque idea of something hanging over the edge of a table, creating a false picture plane with the front of the table, and then painting something seemingly in front of it to create that illusion of depth. So I think they were both very interested in illusion and the effects of light. Hunter expresses it in a very traditional way, but very beautifully rendered pieces. Lembeck, who showed at Louis Mizell Gallery in New York City, and Lou Mizell was the guy that invented the word photorealism. So Lembeck was very much involved in the early days of the photorealist style. This was done in 1988. Jennifer Baker is here. We've got Jennifer Baker is here between Thomas Hart Benton, a beautiful little lithograph, and on the other side is Alice Neel, and we'll talk more about Alice Neel for a second here. But Jennifer, could you say a few words about your piece? What was on your mind as you did it?
Well, this painting,
Actually,
okay.
let me take this.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you can't hear me. Just hold it. Okay. This painting is part of a. Okay. Talking. This painting is. This painting is part of a series that I've been working on over 30 years, on and off, documenting the neighborhood where my studio is, and how that neighborhood has changed over that time period. And actually, seeing this show that Fred curated gave me a thought about my own work that I hadn't really thought about before. But there's a lot of images here about industry and working people. And I feel like my paintings are kind of documenting the end of a lot of industry that was in Philadelphia and really other cities at the same time. So this warehouse is burning because it's no longer used. And there were all these industrial buildings that were being demolished and being allowed to burn down. And that's really the story that I'm telling, that I have observed over the last 30, 40 years even.
You know, and when we think about the artist's voice, go ahead, I'll let you put that on wherever you want.
Got to put the outer degree to good use.
Okay. When we think about the artist's voice, you know, Jennifer working in that area in Northern Liberties, she's very involved with the community. She sees all these changes. And what does she paint about? She paints about life going on, life as it is, life unvarnished, nothing. She's not doing pretty pictures of these things. This is about real life though. And to continue on with the theme, thank you, Jennifer.
Welcome.
To continue on with the theme about real life, Alice Neel, of course, is an icon, one of the really well-known artists in the world today. And I think it's very interesting that her central thesis essentially was to paint women as they really are, not as, she actually used the term, not as idealized, perfect little creatures or dangerous whores. Those were the terms that she used. Now, she was very outspoken, often criticized for that. And for a good part of her life, she was basically unknown as an artist. During the Depression, she had a time in her life when she had some marital problems. Her husband took her child away to Cuba, and she went into a long depression and was hospitalized for a year. And when she came out of that, she actually lived with someone named Ethel Ashton. And when I saw that name, I thought, Ethel Ashton. Ethel was the librarian at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts when I was a student there. So I knew Ethel pretty well. And Alice Neel was teaching at Moore College of Art in Philadelphia at the time. And they were very great friends. During the Depression, Alice Neel worked for the WPA and earned $30 a week. And a story that I like is how artists can be unknown and then all of a sudden something happens. The world changes, something happens, and they become superstars. That's what happened to Alice Neel. And what happened in her case, an artist, a filmmaker named Robert Frank, was making a movie about the Beat Generation, and it had Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac involved in it. And he had Alice Neel in the film. And the film was called Fool My Daisy. At that time, the 1960s, the feminist movement was becoming much more solidified, and the realism, the rebellion against the male gaze, things like that, that Alice Neel personified, she became more and more famous. And, and today, like I say, she is one of the icons of the art world. Very, she doesn't do meticulous rendering, but you get the feeling, the sense of the person very strongly in her work. I think it's interesting to compare Alice Neel with Colleen Browning, another very well-known artist. And we look at Colleen Browning was a magic realist painter who became very interested in the occult and horoscopes. And this is called The Astrologer, done in 1985. This painting is very dark, very mysterious. The Alice Neel is very light, very loose, compared to the very strong control that Colleen Browning exhibits in her pieces. How we doing time-wise? Okay. Now when we talk about structure, I've got something I think is really kind of interesting when we compare Larry Day with Jane Piper here. Larry Day and Jane Piper are both very well-known artists, especially in the Philadelphia area. They were great friends. And Larry Day, you talk about historical kinds of things. He was in the army in World War II and actually fought on Iwo Jima, which kind of to imagine the kind of control and quietness really of his work, which is very typical of his work. To think of this guy in a foxhole on Iwo Jima in 1944 is pretty amazing, I think. But getting back to the idea of painting structure, you'll notice that Larry Days, he uses a lot of triangular shapes interspersed with organic shapes. If you were to turn this painting on its side, you would see something very similar to Jane Piper's painting here. Triangular shapes with organic shapes interspersed. They're almost mirror images compositionally if you rotate one 90 degrees. The other thing I think is quite interesting as far as the voice. See, I think these two pieces have very similar voices. The balance between positive and negative space. Very light feel, lots of negative space. Same thing with the Jane Piper. I took the opportunity to, Sama does have one of my own pieces in the show. It's called Morning Flight. I had been to California to visit my brother, and I flew back on the red eye to Philadelphia. I got off the plane about 5 a.m. and went to the restaurant, had a bite to eat, and this guy was sitting there looking out. I took some photographs of him and basically did a straight photorealist piece. I added some things to it for compositional reasons. I added these plants up in the upper right corner because I thought there was too much motion this way, and that stops it to circulate you back into the painting. So this is my own entry to the found voice. It's a very quiet kind of introspective painting, I think, and very glad that it's here at Sama. So. Peter Milton, you know, what happens if an artist is colorblind? Now, Peter Milton didn't know he was colorblind until some people started talking about the pinks they were seeing in his paintings. And he said, pink, I don't know what you're talking about. Once he realized he was in fact colorblind, he began to work almost exclusively in black and white. And man, this guy, these are etchings and engravings that he does, but they are incredibly meticulously detailed. When you look at the patterning and the geometric precision of these, really outstanding work by Peter Milton. It's worth the trip to Sama just to take a close look at this. Just a few more things here. George Bellows, another one of my heroes. George Bellows, I love the range that he exhibits. You know, he's both a great landscape painter, a painter of city life, and also a great portrait painter. George Tooker, well, Tooker, you know, they thought of himself as a magic realist, but he just considered himself a realist. But his paintings are about the dehumanization of society. And, you know, how does that contrast with the beautiful landscape paintings we saw earlier? The paintings about abstraction and still lifes and so on. Tooker is really about psychology and the inner workings of the mind. Another art, now we talk about artists who were unknown and then became famous. Tooker actually was unknown for a while. Then he became very well known in the 40s and 50s, was completely unknown in the 60s and 70s, and then rediscovered in the 80s. So we see that as society changes, things change in society, all of a sudden artists are reevaluated. And aren't we lucky that a place like SAMA exists to hold on to these things until they become famous again? So he's very famous again now. So George Tooker, great artist. Yeah, Ben Shahn here. Now, Jack Levine and Ben Shahn are similar in that they were both interested in social realism, where they spoke in their work about things that were going on in society. Shahn here was born in Lithuania. His father was exiled to Siberia when Russia took over Lithuania. That was in 1902. And eventually, and he and the rest of his family escaped, ended up in the United States, and eventually the father escaped from Siberia and met them in New York, and they all lived in Brooklyn. You know, so it's not surprising that he was very interested in things going on in society, politics, and so on. This painting is called "The Disturbed Man." I know we're getting out of time here, so let's move on. Let's see. Yeah, we have the next three pieces are all about pattern and texture. I think you can see there's a lot in common between this and this. Lots of tiny shapes, heavily textured. This is called Beach Bones by Robert Cronauer. This is called Tobago by Patricia Tobacco Forrester is her name. She studied at Yale with an artist named Janet Fish. You can probably, if you know Janet Fish's work, you get a sense of Janet Fish in this with the extreme detail, but she worked exclusively from life. In fact, she was so devoted to that in the winter, when she didn't feel she could work outside, she went to Costa Rica and spent her winters there. Now, Maxine Cable, she's also interested in the textures of nature, but instead of painting them, she actually takes them and puts them in a box and puts these things together. I think these are very beautiful. You know, I love painting, but this is like painting with wool and fiber and different bones, shells, a wasp nest and a bird nest. Very illuminating paintings, I think, by Maxine Cable.
Okay.
Let me finish up this tour up here with this this painting by George Lavanish of a northern pike. This is an example of a painting that I think a lot of curators would say, well, I'm not going to put that in a show. It's more of an illustration. It should be on the cover of Field and Stream magazine. I love this piece. It's the kind of piece, we talk about the ripple effect, you know, what makes you be an artist. I remember looking at Field and Stream as a kid, you know, at 12, 13 years old, and seeing these paintings of fish on the covers of Field and Stream and saying, man, I'd like to be able to paint a fish like that, you know. And when I looked at this, I thought, this is very illustrative, but you know what? This is the kind of thing that when we think about art in general and what keeps it going and what inspires us to be artists and do art all our lives, this is a good example of something that grabbed me when I was 12 or 13 years old. And I'm very glad to have it in this show.
I believe this was commissioned to be a stamp.
Oh, really?
Part of a stamp series.
That's a great point. I didn't see that, but
Repeat that on the microphone.
yeah, very good. Yeah, it was commissioned to be a stamp. Okay. Fantastic. So I want to, those of you who were able to come, I don't know, does anyone want to ask a question or anything? Any Zoom people?
Yeah, Fred.
I don't know if I'm gonna be able to hear anybody because,
Okay.
because of how the thing is working.
Okay, all right.
Oh,
Well,
can't hear me. Oh,
I think we can conclude it then. Andrew, I thank you for manning the camera here, and
oh.
I hope you get a chance to see this in person. If not, we are going to record, this is being recorded. It'll be on YouTube eventually, and
They say thanks, Linda Donardo said, thanks, Fred.
oh, great, Linda, great, thank you.
We just want to say if they want questions, they can type it. We can't hear them.
Okay, if you type in a question, we'll be glad to deal with it. Linda, great, glad you got to watch, and
Rob Cuff says, thanks, Fred.
okay, thank you, Rob. Good, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. I think we're gonna end it there, but
Okay,
good talk. Thank you.
all right, thank you all.